Josh Wolf, and I am coming to you live from a medieval temple on a green screen from Auckland, New Zealand. And today we have a great debate between two published authors, as I understand it. Arjuna is not here today. He's moving house at the moment. I helped him shift a bunch of his stuff today to his new location. Let me just turn off my own echo here. So you're stuck with me, and I will actually be back tomorrow at 8 a.m. New Zealand time as a debater. We're going to be talking about does objective morality exist? That's with Nama Madhurya, Gopal Ram, and T-Jump. It's a four-way. It's an intersectional debate. Theists, objective morality versus atheists, subjective morality. Mash those things up. But today we're talking about do scientific accuracies in the Vedas prove Krishna? And arguing in favor of that proposition is the heretical scientist from another undisclosed location somewhere on the face of the planet Earth. It's Sidharth. Welcome.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, so you're going to be presenting scientific accuracies in the Vedas. I moderated your debate with T-Jump on that a couple of weeks back, so I'm looking forward to seeing this debate today. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Do you want to give like a brief introduction of yourself? Because there may be some people who, unlike me, weren't in the last debate. I haven't seen it yet.
Sure. First, I would like to thank you and Arjuna for putting this together and giving me a venue to share my research. I'm a data scientist by training. My name is Sidharth. I also like Sanskrit texts. I can read them and understand them with the help of modern technology, thanks to natural language processing. And in my recent foray into research, I did some data science work with the Puranas, and I published a book, which you can see in the link below the YouTube video if you like to read. And I'll be talking from that book and my research, which I published in this debate.
Epic. Yeah, I actually got my hands on your book. I think it's in Kindle Unlimited, so I was able to read it for free. Or I might have paid a few bucks for it. Anyway, it's on my Kindle now, and I looked at it. It's great. Awesome. Looking forward to this. And in the contraposition we have, so we got the heretical scientist advocating for scientific accuracies of the Purana, and we have the godless theist, James Fodor, phoning it in from Australia. Am I right? Are you in Australia?
Yeah, Melbourne, Australia. That's right.
Melbourne, Australia. Awesome. Thanks for joining us, James.
No worries. Pleasure.
Team Red. Am I right?
I guess that's what we're going with.
Yeah, do you want to just give a brief introduction for folks who have never seen or heard of you before?
Sure. So I guess I'm sort of a neuroscientist. I just finished a master's degree in neuroscience end of last year. I'm waiting to hopefully enroll in a PhD program this year in sort of computational neuroscience, which is one of my interests. I also have an interest in philosophy, well, generally, and not specifically philosophy of religion. And so I do some debates and critique videos and other things, often relating to more Western apologetics, so Christian apologetic stuff, but I'm also interested in other religious traditions. So it's really been a pleasure to be invited and chat about this. I also have a book, which is called Unreasonable Faith, where I respond to the claims of William Lane Craig, who is a Christian evangelist, apologist, if you're interested in that sort of thing. And yeah, feel free to check out my channel. And also I do videos on the channel channel of Digital Gnosis, which you're welcome to also check out, where we do more counter-apologetic stuff.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I loved William Lane Craig versus Richard Dawkins, one of the highlights of that tour. Great. Thanks for joining us, James. I was going to introduce you as the William Lane Craig hater, but I went with godless theist, I think is better. The heretical scientist versus the godless theist. It's great.
Yeah, it's a ring to that.
It does. So we chatted briefly before, and we've agreed that Sidharth is going to go first and present his case. So I'm going to drop out of the way and let you begin presenting your case of scientific accuracies in the Vedas. Take it away, Sidharth.
Thank you, Josh. And we'll start again with slides. Okay, let's see. Okay, so thank you, my dear friends, for joining for this debate. Before I begin my case, I'd like to share a quick, short story. There was a friend of mine who is an imaginary friend who said there is no sun. And I said, oh, are you crazy? I mean, there is sun if you step out of your room. And he said, no, I don't want to step out of my room. I want to see sun in my room. Now, his room was closed, had no windows, no doors. I mean, a door at least, but it was like in a basement. He couldn't step out. He wouldn't step out of the room, and he won't take my word that there is no sun. And sadly, that's the situation with the atheists, currently in the world, because they won't really step out of their comfort zone and take a look at the evidence. So today I'm going to present some very strong empirical evidence from the Puranas, which are ancient Sanskrit texts. And I'm going to use evidence from the Puranas to show that the belief in Krishna is rational. Moreover, if somebody out there who's saying there is no God, they're not evaluating this evidence, then they are lazy. So let me begin. First, the epistemology, we can say, sorry, this term epistemology can be broadly said as, how do we know what we know? Now, epistemologies can be divided broadly into two categories: ascending knowledge and descending, or ascending method and descending method. By ascending method, I mean that methods of induction, logic, rational arguments, where we make a theory, then we have some then we have some testing, some hypothesis, and all that repeat, and again we go through processes, like for example Newton's theory for gravitation, and then later came theory of relativity. So like that, making step-by-step progress, going forward towards the truth. So that's one way of finding out knowledge, or how do we know what we know. Another way of finding out knowledge is avarohan in Sanskrit, which means descending. Descending means we take knowledge from somebody, or not just somebody, actually, knowledge coming from a divine source, which is free from any speculation or any guesswork. The Puranas or the Vedas claim that they are such a source of knowledge coming from divine source. Now, you may say, well, tomorrow somebody may come and say that they have a book from Loch Ness Monster, and there's a book from that monster which claims to be the god, and somebody may say, I follow the monster, and here's the book comes from this, and the monster exists. That is why just having the knowledge is not enough. Once we get knowledge from either of these processes, they have to go through testing. In fact, any of these knowledges coming from either ascending process or descending process have to be tested both as a society and as an individual. Now, there are two kinds of tests we can do. So given any knowledge, we can verify in two different ways. One is the subjective verification, and another is an objective verification. So what's a subjective verification? So subjective verification would be if there is a Loch Ness monster, and there should be some way of individually experiencing it, some kind of emotional experience or some kind of amazing experience you have, which nobody else can see, and you have that experience. With God, according to the Puranas, there is also subjective verification, which we'll get into in a moment. And objective verification is something where, it doesn't involve my perspective on it, but practically everybody can have, similar view of that phenomena. So what are some subjective predictions from the Puranas? Because here I'm claiming, or the Puranic sages are claiming, that the Puranas or the Vedas are a source of genuine knowledge. So what are some predictions, both subjective and objective, from the Puranas, which can be tested? For subjective predictions, the Puranas claim that if you follow the Puranic method, you can get free from envy and anger, and you can experience an unbounded happiness, a form of unbounded happiness which you haven't experienced in material world. Like suppose you like cakes, or you like ice cream. You can take one cake, 2, 3. After a moment, hey, you can't take more. It's not hurt. However, the Puranic sages claim that by following this method, one can experience a sense of happiness coming from their connection with God. Similarly, freedom from envy and anger. Again, these are subjective methods to which my atheist friends may, argue that this is just a psychological phenomena, because, some of them are neuroscientists and they can, or they're studying cognitive sciences, and they can claim this is just, a cognitive process this has got nothing to do with God. And that's the problem with the subjective method, that, it doesn't stand the test so well. There are always questions about it. Now, what are some objective predictions in the Puranas by which we can support our claim that the Puranas are sourced to a genuine knowledge? And when the Puranas talk about there being a God, we can take it, as accurate knowledge. Now, since we're making an extraordinary claim, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This is said famously by Carl Sagan. So we have to show, or I have to show, some data in the Puranas which is extraordinary, and there should not be any plausible explanation. There should not be any empirical explanation available for such data. In other words, I have to show some data in the Puranas which is empirically inaccessible to the ancient sages who wrote them. So just to give a small background on the Puranas, Puranas are ancient Sanskrit texts written at least 2,500 years ago, and before that they were an oral tradition. So if they had some access, or if they had some data which is extraordinary and which is empirically inaccessible to them, then I have, made my case. So let's look at some of the claims or some of the data points which I discovered in my study of the Puranas. And I already published these results in a peer-reviewed journal. So I will discuss 3 important data points. There are many more, and I discuss those data points in my book. Number 1, date of the age of the universe. So according to the Puranas, as you can see in the bottom table, our universe is 13.819 billion years old. According to modern scientists, our universe is 13.801 billion years old. The difference is 0.1%. Now, notice that over the last 100 years, these scientific estimates have monotonically approached the Puranic value. If Puranic sages or ancient sages were guessing or making any estimates like the other ancient traditions, they would not be so close to the scientific estimate. In fact, later I will discuss the probability that Puranic sages could have guessed this date. And notice also that this scientific estimate is a product of very rigorous cosmological research. In fact, they had to send out Fermat and Planck to figure out this date by measuring the properties of cosmic microwave background. So that's data point number 1. The Puranic date for the age of the universe differs from the latest scientific date by 0.1%. Data point number 2, date for the origin of the sun. Again here, the Puranas state that the sun is 4.563 billion years old. What do the scientists say? That the sun is 4.567 billion years old. Difference, again, 0.1%. And once again, you can see that the scientific estimates have monotonically approached the Puranic value. The Puranic statement, or the Puranic data point has been the same for last 2,500 years. In fact, for the first time, Puranas are providing a way to verify modern scientific data, an independent way to verify scientific estimates. Data point number 3, the date for end Permian mass extinction, or in other words, Earth's greatest mass extinction. According to the Puranas, the greatest mass extinction on Earth happened 251.2 million years ago. According to the scientists, the biggest mass extinction on Earth happened 251.9 million years ago. The difference 0.3%. So these three dates are coming from very diverse scientific methods: paleontologist, astrophysicist, and cosmologist. So let's look at an explanation. The most popular explanation, guessing. Now, the probability of guessing one date accurately is 1 by 10 to the 62. Why I say that? The reason I say that because the Puranic sages in their books of numbers ranging from 1 to 10 to the 62. Now, if we assume there was uniform distribution, then the probability that they could have guessed, chosen one date and that they happen to be correct is 1 over 10 to the 62. Probability of guessing 3 dates, 1 over 10, 186. Just to give you a sense of this number, if you were to win 30 lotteries in a row, or if you were to guess credit card numbers, 16-digit credit card numbers of a family of 10 or 12 people, that's the same probability you have here for guessing these three dates right. And these three dates are not the only data points in my book. My book also talks about predictions about embryology, predictions about cosmological distances. Like recently, Voyager just crossed over the heliocentric boundary. That data point is also in the Puranas. So these three data points we just share are simple and easy to understand. That's why I present here. So guessing, I think it fails, doesn't stand. So my friend may raise these objections, and I want to counter them before they even come up. One, somebody may claim maybe I was fudging the numbers. I was playing with the numbers and I just made something up here. To counter that, one, I have published a paper and it was peer reviewed and they could check my calculations. Two, there are only two novel things I added in my paper or in my study. One, a factor of 2, which comes from Sridhar Swami, a 13th century scholar. And the second novel thing in my paper is a new time unit called Pratisandhi, which is found in Vayu Purana and Brahmanda Purana. So I can't be blamed for fudging the numbers. Two, somebody may say, maybe I'm cherry picking good things from the Puranas and other things are all trash. The Puranas only have about a dozen dates, and I discuss all of them in my book. 11 out of 12 have some very significant event associated with it. So I don't think I can be accused of cherry picking. Somebody may say, oh, what about the Puranic kings and personalities? How can there be kings and personalities millions of years ago? Now this brings us to an important point about the Puranas. The Puranas are discussing, right from the beginning, they're saying that we're discussing a higher dimensional world or a subtle world around us. And to give you an example, suppose I were to give you an address that go to, say, building 101 Adam Street. And when you go to that building, you go to the ground floor and you see there's nobody there. But in that building, there are many floors above it. So you can't just claim there is nobody there even though you have not looked at the top floors. In modern science, since Einstein's theory of relativity, the paradigms of higher dimensional space are present everywhere in modern physics. Most of the modern physics theories have a concept of higher dimensional physics, which means they accept the idea that our world, which is three-dimensional, is not the only space where matter can exist and things can happen. In fact, very often they go with 11 dimensions, 26 dimensions, 9 dimensions. The Puranas claim that there is a higher dimensional world around us. Now this claim, and they're describing features from that plane. So this claim cannot be tested because any claim about higher dimensional space is by definition unfalsifiable. However, suppose you went to that house, 101 Adam Street, somebody on the topmost floor would see the same sun as somebody on the ground floor. And that is why these dates for these significant events are matching. So yes, I not presenting any evidence for the plausibility of Puranic kings and personalities. However, by definition, they are unfalsifiable. So, summarizing, so there are two epistemologies. One is ascending, second, a descending. Two broad divisions. Ascending, you would say modern science, descending, Puranas and Vedas. Now, modern science is knowledge where scientists can make mistakes, and actually often they do make mistakes, whereas Puranas and Vedas claims that this knowledge is free from mistakes, it is coming from a divine source. In any knowledge, there has to be an objective and subjective predictions so that that knowledge can be tested if it is true or not. Since I'm making a very strong claim about the Puranas, it's an extraordinary claim. An extraordinary claim requires extraordinary evidence. I present 3 data points: age of the sun, age of the universe, and date for the Earth's greatest mass extinction. In all these 3 data points, science has come to agree with the dates given in the Puranas. This data is empirically inaccessible to the ancients because they don't have any technologies. So I have established here that Puranas are a genuine source of knowledge. Now, modern science, using these ascending methods, may say they don't know whether God exists or not exists. They're not sure. They may say we don't need God to explain different things. However, they can't prove either this or that. However, the Puranas, which we have just shown a moment ago, are a genuine source of knowledge. They claim that there are superhuman beings who choreograph cosmic events around us. And they also claim that Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead, or the supreme personality. Now, they don't stop with that claim. With any knowledge, they always give methods to verify. So if somebody is impressed with the knowledge which is given in the Puranas, which I just shared, and is, open to the idea that there is a possibility Krishna can exist, and because seeing Puranas as a genuine source of knowledge, then if they claim that God doesn't exist, then they are just being lazy. Why? Because the Puranas also give the method by which you can yourself test the claim, which is you can follow the Puranic method and see if you can have an experience of Krishna. Because at the end of the day, it's all about experiencing the Supreme Being, not just talking about it, not just philosophizing about it. Because there are tremendous benefits to be had for the society and for the individual by establishing our relationship with God. So, thank you, my dear friends.
Epic. Love it. I know James is a big fan of epistemology as well. I was looking through some of your previous debates and papers, and I saw a bunch of stuff on epistemology there. It's a great start. I love the argumentum ab flying spaghetti monster at the beginning too. It's great. Just one thing, the 1 out of 1 every 1 to the power of 10 to the power of 62. I love how you're bringing in those numbers there. Scientific. I do think it needs a plus or minus at the end to make it like just that extra ting, plus or minus whatever their lifetime is, because they probably know that the universe didn't start before they were born. But anyway, minor thing. I loved it. It was great. Let's hear what James has to say about this. Thank you, Sidharth. James, over to you.
Right, thanks. So I don't have a formal presentation. I think it would be more useful for me to I do have some questions prepared that hopefully will, for Sidharth, which hopefully will clarify, some of the issues, or I guess the perspective that I bring to this. So before I get into those, I want to ask a kind of meta question. Sidharth, would you say, so from my point of view, so I'm an atheist, I'm a naturalist, so I don't think that there's anything that exists outside of, the material universe. Do you think that I should be persuaded by the evidences that you've presented? Let's suppose that I read into them and so forth, and I have read your paper on this. Should I be presented, if I was rational, should I be persuaded by these evidences?
Well, I made my case. I said, if somebody is claiming that they are naturalist and they come across my evidence and they still claim to be naturalists, and I could just say they're lazy.
Right. Well, so the reason I ask this question is because it seems to me that a lot of arguments for different religions or different positions are persuasive to people who basically already believe in that worldview or are very closely leaning towards that. But to people outside of it are not really very persuasive. So off the bat, I just want to understand if what you think your argument or your case is doing. Is it something that should persuade me, or at least to take your claims a lot more seriously about Krishna and about your worldview? Or is this something that you would say is only persuasive to someone who already accepts Puranas and other texts as inspired?
Well, as I said earlier, that somebody has to be open to the idea that there can be a sun. They should be open to the idea of walking out of the room and taking a look at the evidence. And if somebody doesn't want to take a look at the evidence, yes, I cannot persuade him. But as long as they are open-minded to the idea, there can be knowledge which they're not aware of. Sometimes people have positions which are not really open to the idea of changing it. So if somebody is flexible enough and as humble enough to accept, yes, I could be wrong about something. Maybe I need to, step out of my comfort zone. Maybe there's a world outside my filter bubble. So if they're open to that idea, I feel that this argument can convince them.
Okay, fair enough. I think that makes sense. So I like to think of myself as an open-minded person, but also a skeptical person. And so when I saw the claim that the Puranas, my Sanskrit is obviously not very good, so you can correct me on my pronunciations. The Puranas were able to predict, according to you, the age of the universe and the age of the sun as well. Obviously, that's a pretty big claim. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. I obviously want to discuss that further. But again, just so we sort of move in a logical progression. So your claim, or I guess you had three claims that you mentioned in that presentation that you also discussed in your article. So in these texts, you claim that there is a prediction of the age of the universe, of the sun or the solar system, and of the most recent mass extinction. That's correct?
Yeah, no, not the most recent mass extinction. Earth's greatest mass extinction.
The greatest mass extinction, sorry.
Yeah, it's called the Permian Extinction, 251.9 million years ago.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. So you claim these dates are in these texts. So one of my questions would be, how do you account for those predictions? And then I would contrast it with how I account for them. So maybe I'll answer first just to set the stage. So you sort of preempted this in your slides when you said that one possibility, so you gave two possibilities that a skeptic might raise. One is that this was just a lucky guess, and obviously that's not tenable, so I'm not going to argue that. But the second possibility you mentioned was essentially cherry picking and fudging the numbers, as you said. And perhaps unsurprisingly, that is what I think is the case here, and we'll get into that. But what I want to understand first of all is, from your point of view, what do you think accounts for this congruence between these predictions and science? So how do we explain this on your view?
Well, I said right in the beginning, the Puranic sages, they claim that this knowledge is divine, coming from a divine source.
Okay, so they received this knowledge from a divine source and wrote it down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I don't want to go into this for too long, but I do think it's relevant here because it relates to how I assess these sorts of claims. Because suppose that, again, I don't claim to be an expert on Hindu worldviews or your views in particular, but if I am to understand that there's a divine source that communicates to particular people in the past and they write these down for our benefit so that to help us bring to a knowledge of Krishna and so forth, I would assume that the knowledge that they would provide us would be things that would be sort of relevant, persuasive, interesting to a sincere seeker, this sort of thing, right? So is the idea that these dates were provided as evidence to help persuade us about because obviously they wouldn't have been relevant to people in the past. They wouldn't have known the true dates.
That's right.
So this is for us now to persuade us. Is that what you think is the case?
Yeah, I mean, so Krishna is a very amazing being. He doesn't plan only for one point in time. He's planning for the future. So thousands of years ago, or up to 500 years ago, in fact, up to 15th century, most people naturally had faith in scripture, whether it be in West or the East. And then came the Renaissance, and things happened in the West where the religions went out of their boundary and did a lot of things which were not really look up to the standard. of their scripture, and people kicked them out, modern science took over. And since that time, people lost faith in the scripture. But prior to that, there was no need for this data to be given and to convince any person. In fact, you can't use it because these data points have come in modern science only recently, so it won't work. So what you're asking is a good question, and we have to look at it another way. That what do the Puranas explain? Like how do these dates come in the Puranas? Puranas are not just stating the dates in a statement. In fact, they're describing the history of many kings and personalities who are living in the higher dimensional world around us. So, and why those histories are given? Those histories are given to show us how one should behave as a devotee of God, how one can have a relationship with God, how in given difficult situations, how one can re-establish that relationship with God. So that is the perspective behind giving the Puranic knowledge. And as a side product, this information comes out of it if you do the calculations. Now, you made another point when we were having this discussion. You said you think it's number fudging or it's cherry picking. I would like you to first defend that before we go more into the discussions. Why do you think it's number fudging? Even though I have a peer review paper and I showed you there are only 2 changes I make in my data points. I'm using the Puranic time units, which have been found by hundreds of the scholars, and I'm using the same Puranic time units except for 2 things. One, a factor of 2, which comes from Sidharth Swami in 13th century, and second, a new time unit, which is given in Vayu Purana and Brahmanda Purana. So what makes you to claim that I'm fudging the data?
Okay, yeah, that's fair. So the reason that I was just asking what your interpretation is was so that I understand where we stand with respect to how we account for, because there's an alleged congruence here between these numbers. And I mean, you can call it a congruence. It's, I guess, a question of how you construct the number. So we'll say that it's a congruence between these numbers, and I account for it in one way, you account for it in a different way. I have some questions about how you account for it, but maybe we'll put those aside for the moment, because I feel like that there's still issues with your explanation, even if I sort of accept your worldview. But I understand you want to discuss the details of the numbers and for me to defend my number fudging claim. So let's talk about that. I'm happy to get into that. So again, obviously, I don't read Sanskrit. I only know little bits about Hindu cosmology and theology that I learned a bit at uni. I've read up, so I know little things, but I'm very far from an expert. So I had to make sure that I understood the logic behind your derivation of these numbers here, because it's not like there's just a passage that says the universe is 13.7 billion years old. There's a process that you use to add up some numbers here to get that number.
It's very easy. I can explain the process if you want to hear the process.
Yeah, let's go through that. Let's talk about the age of the universe to start with, just one thing at a time.
Sure. So I don't have slides here, but I think I can explain very simply, because so there is a personality known as Brahma. His day is equal to 8.64 billion years. According to the Puranas, at the end of his previous day, so currently we're halfway into his day, and before the day there's a night, and at the end of the previous day is when, according to the Bhagavad Purana, there was the origin of the universe. Now a day is 8.64 plus another half day, which we're into it, another 4, and there is a small time unit in between called Prati Sandhi. So that total comes out to be 13.819.
Okay, so let's talk, first of all, let's talk about the 2 additional assumptions or premises that you introduce, which are critical for deriving this result. So one of those you just mentioned, which is the Pratisandhi, that this period of time between, so this is a period of time between the Pralaya and the Kapla periods of time, is that correct?
No. So this Pratisandhi is a period of time between day and night of Brahma. Between every day and night. So after every night, there's a Pratisandhi, and after every day, there's a Pratisandhi.
Okay, good. Yes, so that's what I was saying. Okay, so in your paper, you mentioned that you are the first to discover the existence of this time period. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Yes. So why is it that no one else who has read these texts for hundreds of years has discovered this?
Well, as you also answered it, because you mentioned earlier that why would Krishna give this knowledge in his books, or why this knowledge is available in the books when people can't even test it? So people read Bhagavad Purana prior to modern science came about, not for the purpose of getting data. They were reading for purification, and they were not collecting data points when they were reading the books. only in last 200 years, I would say, the modern science has reached Indian shores, that we have started seeing comparison of science and religion, and there's a conversation, a bridge, being built between the two texts. So it's as the science goes forward, that's what it does. It goes into territories which are uninhabited and goes there and discovers new knowledge and brings it to the forefront. Since I'm a data scientist, and I was studying the Puranas, I come across it and I present the verses and the translation from both the Puranas to discuss that about this new time unit.
Yes. So I should say at this point, I'm not qualified, and I will not attempt to interpret passages from the Puranas. Obviously, I don't speak Sanskrit and I don't know the context. So I'm not going to try to do that. All I'm trying to do here is ask you questions and then discuss in the context of what others have said and what you introduce. So I won't get into an argument about what this or that passage says. All I will note at this point is that in your paper you do mention one other particular scholar who has translated a particular verse differently, and therefore understood this passage in a different way to you do. Is that correct? And you think that they're wrong about this?
Yeah, I'm not saying they're wrong. What I write there in my paper is that there's another scholar who went out this passage and he translated it, because people are trying to bring this knowledge out to the Western Hemisphere, the knowledge of the Sanskrit text. And when they're bringing it out, they have to be good English writers too. They can't be just one or the other. They can't be just good at Sanskrit and not good at English. The previous person who did a job, he didn't do a good job because his English was not so well. So he sort of like jumbled the situation up there. And that is why in my paper, I give word for word translation. And you're saying you're not an expert, but translating those verses are only like 2 or 3 verses, very key verses. And these days, thanks to internet, you have access to Sanskrit to English dictionaries, and you can check my translation because I give word for word for each of those verses. It won't take you more than 15 minutes or 10 minutes to go over verses.
I'm not saying that you've been deceptive in any way. I believe that you believe this, so don't get me wrong about that. But what I'm saying is, so you mentioned someone called Tagora. I don't know how to pronounce this name. And you said they didn't understand. Yeah. You say they didn't understand what the verse is actually saying. You didn't say that they didn't translate it correctly, or you didn't just say that. You say they didn't understand the verse. You've understood it correctly.
Because they jumbled up the translations, because, as I said, they are not aware that they are discussing in the passage a new time unit, and then when the translation comes, because their English is not so good, they mix up the words and they produce a sentence which can't be understood. Like, well, hey, what it's saying, is it English or is it some Chinese? Because this, as I said, this is a new frontier of research. In any new frontier, there are when you go back and you study it, you find new evidence there, new material there. So this is a new frontier of Puranic translation, like Puranic research, where Puranas are being studied word by word, and studied and understood and being understood by scholars. So here, because I produce a new interpretation or a new translation there compared to what the guy was using before. That is why I submitted it for peer review, so that the other scholars can see that I'm justified in my translation. That is the whole process of peer review, is to check any new claims. Like, suppose you were to go to in a biology lab, and you were to, there is some scientist who did a research and produced some conclusions there. You're a neuroscientist. You study brains, and sometimes people go and analyze the same observations and come with a new explanation. Now, whether the explanation is correct or not, that depends whether they can convince other peers that their explanation is valid. So they submit it for peer review, and that's exactly the process I did. I did a word by word translation, and I submitted it for a peer review process.
Yeah, that's fine. So it would be interesting to see going forward whether this new translation of this particular passage is accepted or not. But I'm still not convinced about this point about that it was previously mistranslated. So, I can believe that, because there are translation issues with a lot of these things. But the way you speak, it's as if people have only begun to read these texts in the last, few decades or something. But even if people have only begun to translate them into English and compare them to modern science in the last few decades, I can believe that. But these things have been studied for centuries. And you're not just claiming that it's only been translated recently, but that no one's actually correctly understood what this passage is referring to. And there's actually an additional element of time in the cosmology that hasn't been identified before. And I just find that rather hard to believe.
Yes, it's a hard to believe thing. And when I found it, I was surprised too. Why somebody overlooked this data point, and that's why I was really surprised. In fact, when I first time I found it, I was like up all night thinking, man, how can somebody miss this huge data point in the text? What are they reading? I don't understand. And to your point, it has not been centuries since when these texts have been read. In fact, the Vayu Purana and Brahmanda Purana were translated into English by Tagare only like 40, 50 years ago. And he's practically the only one who has done it.
Yes, but were they not studied in the Sanskrit before that? That's what I'm asking.
Well, okay.
I mean, I'm assuming that they were. I did not know this intellectual history, right? But I mean, wasn't that the whole point of these texts, that they were studied and used for?
They were not used for.
Or no one read them.
They were used for philosophical purposes. They were not read
for isn't that what we're doing?
They read for purification, which means they read the philosophical points, the stories, and the accounts, and try to imbibe the lessons into life. Not necessarily make tables for data points when these events happen. What is the time? That's not their goal. Because most of the Puranas is philosophy. Yes. It's all about purification. They give the process of bhakti yoga, how one can purify oneself. So that is why there's no like idea of science in the study of the Puranas. The idea of studying Puranas is for purification, for self-realization, and for changing one's lifestyle. That's the idea.
Okay, so so this wasn't seen for quite a long time until recently. So I have another question. So we've so far been talking about this additional unit of time, the Pratisamdi that you discovered. But I have a further question about this, because it's not just discovering that it exists. You also had to work out how long this period of time is in order to add up the numbers correctly, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's also in that passage. There's a verse there in that passage where it talks about Pratisamdi, and that is the most important thing, because the point of Pratisamdi is repeated through multiple verses, through multiple the shlokas. In fact, Tagare translates that point correctly. It's the duration which he messes up. And I give a word by word translation for that a Pratisamdi is equal to Manvantara in duration.
Yeah, okay, and that gives you a year length for it. Okay, so that's where that comes from. So I've already expressed, so I think that's probably as far as we can go with that, but I've already expressed some skepticism about the fact that no one else has picked this up before, but we can put that aside because you've responded to that. So I have another question. This relates now to the second new assumption or hypothesis or premise or whatever you want to call it that you made. And this relates to the factor of 2, which maybe we can talk about now. So if I understand this correctly, this is because when you actually add the numbers up, it comes to basically half of the numbers. So you multiply everything by 2. Does this represent a factor of 2 across the board for the numbers given in Hindu cosmology? Everything is actually a factor of 2 off, according to you?
Yeah. Because Sidharth Swami is making the point that the Puranic time unit given for Bhumandala, and he's making the point that a day on our Earth, a day on Bhumandala is twice as long as a day on Earth. So he's adding a factor of 2 there, and since a day is changed, naturally, all the time units are multiplied by 2. However, I want to go on a little bit sidetrack here, and just because you're a cognitive scientist, neuroscientist, so you have now you're going for PhD in neuroscience. So you understand basics of correlation and congruence.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Because we always discuss, when you have observations and you have, you try to come up with some hypotheses there based on observations. So if there are two set of data points, if they are when you multiply one set of data points by, say, 3 or 4, they come exactly in congruent data set. Would you call that those 2 sets of data points, would you say there's a strong correlation between those two data sets?
You broke up a little bit, but if you said that they're exactly, that they come in exact line, then there's an exact correlation.
Yeah, there is 2 data sets. There is data set B. Data set A is off by a factor of 3 from data set B.
Yeah, right.
So, strong correlation. So, if somebody were to be really skeptic and say, hey, I read Swami's commentary on Vishnu Purana, I reject it. That's what H.H. Wilson did. He was one of the first commentators on Vishnu Purana, and he rejected the factor of 2. Suppose somebody does that. Hey, I don't accept the factor of 2. Still, these dates will be off only by a factor of 2, and that should still raise, eyebrows for anybody who's looking for data and who's looking for some, evidence to see if the Puranas are accurate source of knowledge. I mean, if they're off a factor of 2 for all these data points, that is phenomenal. In my idea, I mean, I'm a data scientist, I study data, so that's how I would say. But you're a neuroscientist, you're doing a PhD, you're smart too. What do you think about it?
Yeah, so if I were to see that result, I would think that is very interesting. That requires some further investigation. But it would lead me to suspect, and honestly, this is what I suspected when I saw this factor of 2 that you introduced, that there's been some fudging going on. And then I would dig further and see if I could understand how the congruence came to be. Now, let me clarify that, because the reason that particularly raises my suspicions is because if the source of this knowledge was a divine source, which couldn't be wrong, as you said, that Puranas are free from mistakes, you said, then I would not expect to see these errant factors of 2 there. I would, in fact, expect to see many highly precise predictions, probably more than 3, but we could discuss that later. But I wouldn't expect to see it off by a factor of 2. So that, in my view, is contrary to your proposed explanation for these congruences. And I think it fits better with my proposed explanation, which is that this is due to number fudging. And I've got more to say about that as well, so we'll get to that. But you just asked about what I thought about this correlation. And what I'm saying is the factor of 2 being off, I think, supports my interpretation.
No, it doesn't, because you missed a key point there. There is Sidharth Swami who is saying there's a factor of 2 there. You're ignoring that, and then you're saying there's a factor of 2 and data is wrong. But if you're looking at it as an open mind, and you're seeing that there is 2 sets of data points which are matching each other and off by a factor of 2, you would think so. Maybe I'm the one who's mistaking something, because these are 3 vastly different data points, not just they coming from one field. And it's not that I am only cherry picking some selected data points in the Puranas. There are only about a dozen dates in the Puranas, not more than that. And I discuss all of those in my book. I pick only 3 of them here because these 3 are the prominent ones. If you want, we can go to all the dozen data points which I have in the book. And moreover, you are saying that this supports a hypothesis, because Puranic from, if Puranas are giving data points which are precisely the same as modern science, only say off by a factor of 2, if you reject Sidharth Swami's commentary, then still this should raise suspicion in the mind of any open-minded scientist that, hey, there is an old book, 2,500 years old, and it has these data points which are only off a factor of 2. What's happening?
Yes, but I already answered that. It does, but I think it doesn't. It does not support your view, which should say that these are correct and not off by a factor of 2. But I've already made that point. Now let's refer to the scholar, I forget his name, sorry, who mentioned this factor of 2. I think you said he was in the 13th or 14th century. When did he raise this?
13th or 14th century. Sidharth Swami.
Yeah, Swami. Yeah, that's right. So so that was 600 or 700 years ago. So why is it that this hasn't been widely accepted by scholars of these texts and already incorporated into these understandings? Why is it that this is apparently a minority view? Because otherwise you wouldn't have to introduce this factor. It would just be the standard length of these dates, right?
Yeah, this is a good point, because Sidharth Swami actually is widely accepted by the Gaudiya scholars. In fact, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is one of the Gaudiya saints, he said that anybody of Sridhar is actually a fallen soul, something like that. He's not a good scholar of the Puranas. So the opinion amongst the Gaudiya scholars of the Puranas is that whatever Sidharth Swami said is as good as gold. In the West, the English translations have started with H.H. Wilson about 200 years ago, who was a Borden professor of Sanskrit at Oxford. He's the one who rejected it. And after him, because he's the first one, there hasn't been many more translations of the Vishnu Purana. In fact, I'm not aware of anybody who has done a thorough job as him, because you have to understand what's happening historically. In 18th century, 19th century, when the Britishers were ruling over India, the British imperialists were coming from the perspective that Bible is an accurate source of knowledge, and Bible said that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. So when they came across these dates or anything related to these dates, they thought it's myth. It's coming because of an ulterior motive coming from the Brahmanas, the teachers of the society, and they are planning this situation. And that is why the English treatment of the Puranas has been highly biased. They haven't studied it. In fact, there's been only few scholars, I mentioned in my paper, about 3 scholars who have even properly understood these time units. Forget about my new time units. Even after H.H. Wilson, not many people have even gone back to the Vishnu Purana. So,
in English or in any language?
Other languages don't care. I mean,
well,
because as I said, it's only in English when you come and interact with the science. In Sanskrit, there is no interaction with science there, so there is no need to discuss these things in Sanskrit.
Okay, so there's something there that I don't quite understand. So in Sanskrit, I understand that Sanskrit scholars are not necessarily interacting with modern science, but they are talking about these chronologies. I mean, obviously, because these dates go back hundreds of years, and they were arguing about this factor of 2. They were still building cosmologies and discussing the length of different periods of time. Is that not correct?
Not necessarily. As I said, these.
Well, then why were they even mentioning this factor of 2 700 years ago? I don't quite understand. These cosmologies are old, even if they weren't compared to science.
Sorry?
These cosmologies and the different periods and lengths of time that I mean, you know what I'm talking about. I've seen diagrams of these. We can show them to the listeners if they're like, these aren't new things that have been devised in the last 100 years, surely. These are very old. And even if they weren't compared to modern scientific accounts until very recently, which I accept, I don't accept that it's only in the last, since they've been translated into English, that people have been discussing these different lengths of time and how long that they took in solar years. It's not like ancient Indians didn't know how long a year was and compared that to their cosmology.
Well, as I said, in ancient India, they will give the years. They will calculate the years. However, since the commentaries which are there, like by Sridhar Swami or by the other scholars which are there, because you have to understand that the modern printing press came only recently, and in fact it came much more late in India. So a commentary by one scholar doesn't reach everywhere else very fast. So only now, because thanks to archive.org, I could access about 6 different commentaries on the Puranas at one time. So this allows me to study each verse by those 6 prominent or 7 prominent scholars for each of the Bhagavad Purana and Vishnu Purana. Is it lack of, making connection with the data points? Because in order to draw up the conclusions, you have to have access to this commentaries and knowledge. Since in ancient India, there was no printing press, it's all, coming out of, palm leaves and hand-to-hand copy. There is not so much scope for discussing commentaries and having this discussion.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Suppose I went back in time, and suppose I could speak Sanskrit, right? And I went back to India, I don't know, 300, 500, 1,000 years ago, whatever time. Yeah. And I were to ask a learned scholar, how long in human years, like in solar human years, is a Manvantara, for example, or insert whatever period of time you like, but just as an example. If I asked how long is that period of time in human years, what would they say?
Depends on if they know the Puranas, because it's not always the case. Somebody who knows Sanskrit, he knows the Puranas. Because
I'm saying a scholar. I'm saying a scholar of this.
Teleporting in from the medieval ages here, I'll tell you. Now, some people say that a Manvantara is equal to X number of normal Earth years. But there's this guy Sridhar Swami who has a controversial opinion, minority one. He reckons it's twice that amount. But not everybody's in agreement with that. The number is there in the book. This guy Sridhar, he's come up with this crazy idea that it's actually twice that. But that's just his gig.
Would you agree with that assessment? I would say so. I would just add more to it. That if any person is aware of Sridhar Swami's commentary, like as I said, if any of the Gaudiya scholars are aware of Sridhar Swami's commentary, then they will also go with that opinion. But they have to be aware of his opinion, because it's not the case that everybody has access to all the texts written by a scholar. Sridhar Swami is a well-respected scholar. The Gaudiya branch of Hinduism is huge. In fact, a big part of East India follows Gaudiya branch, and in that branch, Sridhar Swami is regarded very highly. In fact, amongst the Mayavadis also, he is regarded very highly. So if a scholar is aware of Sridhar Swami's commentary on the Vishnu Purana, then they will also agree with Sridhar Swami. But they have to be aware of it. That was not the case always, that they're aware of somebody's commentary.
Okay, so I'm not very persuaded, but I want to move on to some other points because I still have a couple of questions to go. And those are only the first 2. So we've talked about the new unit of time and we talked about the factor of 2. So those are the 2 new things you introduced. So we've addressed some of that, but I still have a couple of questions to go. And this relates to how we align statements made in the Puranas with what modern science describes. Because obviously, if you read the Puranas, they don't talk about the Big Bang Theory and the nuclear genesis of the elements and things like that, right? They have a different language to describe things, and you have to align that with what modern science studies. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's not so much alignment, because they clearly state that this is the time when they have three kinds of pralayas, or four actually. Pralaya means destruction. There's a destruction which happens at the end of the day of Brahma, which will be, the next one will be in about 4.53 billion years, which actually matches up pretty well with the life cycle of the sun, because sun is supposed to, around that time go out of its hydrogen in the core, and then become a red giant, which is something also the Puranas talk about. Sun becoming. Did I freeze, or did you freeze? Sorry, one more time. I think I froze. So according to the Puranas, there are three types of mass destruction. One is a destruction at the end of the day of Brahma. The next one will be in 4.53 billion years, or actually I give an exact number in my paper in the book. And that matches up pretty well with the life cycle of the sun. So that's one type of destruction. Second one is the destruction which happens at the end of every manvantara. And some of them are more prominent than the other ones. The last one was 251.3 million years ago, which matches up pretty well with the mass extinction. And there's descriptions given, and those descriptions match pretty well with the end Permian mass extinction. So it's not that I have to work with it, but actually it gives the statements about in the Puranas. So these are the features of this mass extinction. And the third destruction is described in the Puranas is the Namittika Pralaya. Namittika means all the elements, the fundamental elements, are destroyed. So it doesn't require any far-fetched reconciliation with the modern sciences.
Okay, so I have some questions about that. So I still take that as an essential agreement with my point, because I didn't actually make a claim about how far-fetched the alignments were. That's actually what I want to address now. Only that you do at least have to make that comparison. So one question I have now, this relates to the age of the universe. We'll get to the mass extinction point later. So first of all, according to, and again, I'll check my understanding of the cosmology here. So as far as I understand it, there is a day in the life of Brahma, and that's divided into the day and the night, yes? And in between them is one duration of pratisanda. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's a day of Brahma called Kalpa. There's a night of Brahma called Kalpa. Between every night,
yes.
between every Kalpa, between consecutive Kalpas, there's a pratisandhi.
Yes. Okay. Yes, but there's a period that's described as Brahma's day and Brahma's night.
Yeah, one kalpa is called Brahma's day, one kalpa is called Brahma's night.
Yeah, okay. Right. And so my question is, when does the universe begin to exist? Is it at the start of the night, or is it the start of the day, Brahma's day?
The universe started at the end of the previous day of Brahma, because that was the end of his 50 years. It's called Prarardha. Prarardha is the 50 years of Brahma.
The 50
at
years?
The end of 50 years.
Yeah, I thought you said 15. I was confused. Yeah,
50. So at the end of 50 years, there was a Namittika Pralaya, or the destruction of the fundamental elements of the universe.
Okay, and then follows the night, and then the pratisanda, and then the day. Is that correct? And we're currently in the day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're currently in the day. We have the day.
Yep. So now, my reading of this was that during Brahma's night, the universe is supposed to be in a quiescent state. There's not supposed to be much happening.
That's not universe. That is the Brahmanda, the solar system, which is supposed to be quiet. So Brahma is taking, and there's nothing happening in the solar system which he's managing. So each Brahma manages a solar system, and when it's time for them to sleep, like there's a Brahma's night, the solar system is sleeping. It's kind of like quiet.
Each Brahma manages a solar system. I thought Brahma created the universe.
No, not Brahma. It was Prakriti who creates the universe. Brahma creates Brahmanda. I mean, Brahma manages part of the Brahmanda. So Brahmanda has 14 different lokas. Lokas are like different planetary systems. I'm not sure. Planetary system is not the right word, because that has a astrophysical. Anyway, the Sanskrit term is lokas, 14 places where people live, different living entities live, and of them, he creates 11 of them, recreates 11 of them, of which at the beginning of its day. And this whole Brahmanda corresponds to a solar system.
Right, and so that's our solar system.
Yeah, we're talking about our solar system here, but each Brahma takes care of a Brahmanda himself. Okay,
so do these different Brahma align in their days, or are they, because this was not what I understood in researching this, so I'll just have to take your word for this, but they're like days and nights are at different times, or how does that work? Because there are many solar systems, obviously, in the galaxy.
The Puranas don't discuss anything about other Brahmas. They also manage other Brahmandas, and they also state that other Brahmandas are some of the other Brahmandas are much more larger than our Brahmanda. In fact, they say that some of the other Brahmandas are 1,000 times bigger. So they don't discuss so much about the time units of the other Brahmandas. That's a topic not discussed in the Puranas.
I see. Okay, so the idea is that so Brahma created our universe at the end of, our solar system, you said.
At the end of
13.7 billion years ago. Okay, but there's already a problem here because, sorry?
No. Brahma created our solar system at the end of its night.
Yeah.
Prakriti, the universe, at the end of the previous day of Brahma.
Okay, right. Yeah, that's not something that I encountered anyway. Again, I'll take your word for that I misread what everything appeared to say. But so the question then here is, how does the creation of the solar system relate to the creation of the universe? So what happened in our solar system during Brahma's night?
During the night of Brahma, everything. He's not what you call working on. He's not working on the Brahmanda. So Brahma creates Brahmanda to help the living entities who are living in the Brahmanda to make progress in their spiritual life. During Brahma's night, the living entities are sleeping in the body of Mahavishnu, and only during the only at the end of Brahma's night, he constructs a solar system, which he is in charge of, and he creates opportunities for the living entities to make further progress in their spiritual life. So he creates situation and circumstances so they can make progress in their spiritual life by gaining knowledge, by purification. So during Brahma's night, he is not performing any activity for the purposes of those living entities. So living entities are in the body of Mahavishnu, and he's not doing anything to work with the solar system, anything. He's not actively participating in anything. Then Prakriti is the one who is managing things, and he's not in charge of anything at that time.
So what happens during that time?
Sorry,
So what happens during that time?
Managing the affairs. There's no much. I don't know. Well, details are not given what happens during that time, because again, the point is that the Puranas give accounts of Puranic personalities for the purpose of purification of living beings. They are not textbooks on cosmology that they will give all the details, what Prakriti is doing at this time, Prakriti is doing at that time. That's not the concern. We have to stick to the data points which are given, come from the accounts which are given. What happened at night, there's no activity at night. That's why we don't have any data points for them.
Well, but this is the problem I have. You say there's no activity at night, and that was what I had gathered from my reading, that it's supposed to be a quiescent state. But that's not the case in the universe. That stars are almost as old as the universe as a whole, and they're not our star, it's true. This is why I was asking you this idea that different Brahmas are responsible for different solar systems, which was not what I had gathered from my reading. But again, I'll go with you what you say about that. But nevertheless, there seems to be plenty of creative activity occurring, even if not in our solar system. And I just don't know how to reconcile that with this idea that it was quiescent and nothing much was happening.
Can I just jump in and say that I find this line of argumentation more convincing than the last one about the number fudging? Like, I actually found that factor of 2 in the correlation pretty strong, the data sets. But this one's interesting, and people are saying, in the comments, like Arpit Sarkar is saying, I thought Brahmanda equals the universe. I would see it's more vulnerable to this kind of fudging. It's not the fudging of the numbers in the data set so much as it is fudging, what the Puranas say gets collapsed in that time, because you're correlating it with this extinction event and the age of the Earth, but you're using numbers that are generally understood to be, as James is pointing out, the destruction of the entire universe, not the age of the Earth. Is that is that where you're going with this, James? Am I catching this?
Well,
argument?
that was my understanding. My understanding was that that Brahma created the universe, and that happened 13.7 billion years ago, according to according to science and also Siddharth's chronology. But my understanding with that was that the first night of Brahma was a period of quiescence when nothing is supposed to be happening, and that's not what we know from science, that there were galaxies and stars and planets and all of that happening, and that seems to be inconsistent with the Hindu cosmology. Now, if Brahma was only creating our solar system, that does change things a bit, but I still think it's a question as to how to reconcile this period of quiescence, which doesn't seem to have any correspondence in science.
Now, just before I jump out, so that you don't think that the red team is ganging up on you here, Sidharth, I just want to say, tinfoil hats on, this is what I reckon is happening. The Puranas are written from the perspective of human beings, right? So stuff is happening there, but nothing that concerns human beings, because extraterrestrials come down to the Earth and genetically engineered the next Cambrian explosion. I'm out.
Yeah, so there are 2 points being made. One is Josh brought it up, and other you brought it up. So I'll try to discuss both the points. First point, you're mentioning, there is plenty of creative activity happening during the night of Brahma too, and I don't have an explanation for it. As I said earlier, there are books which give descriptions of significant events from which human beings can benefit and go forward in the spiritual life. Since there is no life in a solar system, in the Brahma's Brahmanda, where activities are happening, the Puranas don't talk about the activity. Puranas are not saying that that Brahma is that there's no activity happening in Brahma's Brahmanda. Puranas are only saying that Brahma, and there are 3 planetary systems, the 3 lokas, the top 3 lokas, Satyaloka, Tapaloka, and Maharloka. There are still beings there, but they are resting. So there is no, they're not actively creating situations or opportunities for living beings to make progress in their spiritual life, and that is why those things are not discussed. The Puranas are not saying anywhere that there is no activity happening at that time. There's no such claim being made. The only claim which is being made is that, or the only statement being said in the Puranas is that at that time Brahma is at rest. Brahma is not actively, creating situations for the living beings. Now, to Josh's point about the Brahmanda being universe or the solar system, we have to go again with the Sanskrit. According to the 5th canto of the Bhagavatam, it gives the planets which are there in the Brahmanda, and it also gives the distance of the Brahmanda. They both match up pretty well with the solar system. 2, the famous Puranic scholar A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who is actually known for his translation of the Bhagavad Purana, he himself was not sure whether the Brahmanda is a solar system or universe. He's actually one of the recent commentators on the Puranas, written in 1970s, and he was himself not sure whether to translate Brahmanda as solar system or universe, because as I said earlier, people who are studying Puranas, they don't usually interact with science, so they're not sure when they come to translate these terms which term to pick up. However, seeing from the 5th canto of the Bhagavad Purana, the length of the Brahmanda and the planets which I mentioned in the Brahmanda, the most obvious translation of Brahmanda is a solar system. Moreover, the translation of Brahmanda doesn't create any problem with my data points. Why? Because I give verses to show that we're talking about origin of the sun. So there's a clear statement in the Puranas which states that the sun was created by Brahma at the end of his night. That has got nothing to do with the Brahmanda. And there is also exact statement said in the Puranas which says that all the fundamental elements of the universe, of the whole world, everything, Mahat, was destroyed and reconstructed by Prakriti. So whether although I made a good case for Vanda being a solar system, if you don't want to trust that, you can throw it out in the garbage bin. That's fine. It doesn't destroy any of those 3 data points. They still stay intact.
Yeah, so again, as I said earlier, I'm not going to comment on different translations other than to bring out that any issues like that arise. And this does relate to what I said before about having to align terms or phrases used in the scriptures with those used in modern science, and we've already brought out one of those here. I think that there's a couple of others that I want to get to in a moment, but I will just say that my understanding of the Brahman night was that this was a period in which the sort of creative qualities of matter, or the forces, were in balance, and that there was relative quiescence. You've rejected that, so that's fine. I just wanted to reiterate that I'm not entirely convinced with what you said there, given what I've read elsewhere, but obviously you know more about this than me, so we'll just leave that for the moment. And I don't think that really fits with our scientific understanding. But I want to raise another point now. According to well, now I'm a little bit confused about the difference between the solar system and the universe, but it kind of doesn't matter for the point I'm going to make here. So Hindu cosmology is cyclic, so that there will come a point when, whether it's the day of Brahma or Prakriti or whatever it is, that will end, and the universe, the first solar system, then the universe will be destroyed. Right? And there will be a new cycle at some point after that. Is that correct? Oh, are we frozen?
Yeah, sorry. Back.
Sorry, yeah, you froze. I'm not sure what you... So according to Hindu cosmology, the universe will be destroyed at some point in the future, at some finite point in the future. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Universe?
Yeah, the universe.
The Brahmanda will be destroyed, and also the universe will be destroyed. The 2 separate things.
Yeah, well, yeah, let's talk about the universe. So, like the matter and elements of the universe. So, what length of time will that be, in your understanding?
333 trillion, something like that.
Yeah, so it's hundreds of trillions of years. That's what I thought. So the question, though, trillion, yeah. So my question is, how does that fit with current cosmology, according to which our best understanding is the universe will continue to expand forever and will never recollapse or be destroyed? There seems to be a contradiction.
Not really. There is tons of opinions on the cosmology for the future, or the future cosmology, because there are scholars who say there will be another bounce. There are scholars who say that they will again collapse after some time after it expands further. There is not a consensus in this field yet.
Well, consensus is a tricky thing. I mean, I think that according to the standard model in which the universe is open, particularly due to the presence of dark energy, which accelerates the rate of expansion, then there will be continued expansion forever. Now, of course, you could say, well, we don't fully understand all the relevant factors. We don't know what dark energy is. We don't have a quantum theory of gravity. So maybe there will be a change at some point. But all I'm arguing is, with respect to current scientific knowledge, the universe will continue to expand forever and won't be destroyed or collapse at any point. And that seems to be contrary to what is predicted by this cosmology that you've articulated.
I mean, I usually don't go to Wikipedia for such things, but Wikipedia gives 5 different theories: big freeze, big rip, big crunch, big bounce, and they give...
Yes, of course there are different theories. That's consistent with what I said. That let me
finish the point.
Sure.
They give tons of different scholarly references for each of them. So this is not a solved question. When I speak of consensus, there is a consensus amongst the cosmologists that the universe was created, or there was a starting point, origin of the universe, 13.801 billion years ago. There is no two points about it. Now there are 2 schools about what was before the universe. Some schools say there's a big bounce. Other schools say, which is a major school, says it was only Big Bang. Now notice the guys who are on the big bounce side. It is professors at Princeton, Paul Steinhardt. He's a big guy. He's a very famous scientist, cosmologist. So you have to understand, in cosmology, these things are not solved problems yet. Like suppose I were to ask you, you're a neuroscientist, if I were to ask you, where does memory store in our brain? There are currently tons of different opinions. There's not one opinion on that topic. There are scholars, there are scientists who would say that it is stored in synapses. There are others who say that it is stored in the glial cells, something like that, in between the synapses. So these topics, like storage of memories in the brain or the future cosmology, these are unresolved questions. So let's not try to force our opinion on them just for the point of winning a debate. Let's go with what the scientists are saying. We have to accept that there's a genuine unresolved conflict on this topic.
So 2 points there. I don't think the memory example is good. I'm not really sure of neuroscientists who say that it's in the glial cells, but it's just an example, so it's not really the point. With respect to cosmology, I think we'll just have to agree to disagree on this one. Just for those interested in the audience, I fully acknowledge this is not decided upon, and there are alternative models. But the standard model of cosmology, which is called the Lambda CDM model, which you can look up, according to this, which is the standard model that's used and taught, is that the universe will continue to expand at an accelerating rate due to dark energy. And that seems to me inconsistent with the cyclic model that's presented here. Now, that's subject to change, but I do think it represents a tension with the view that you've presented here.
Well, so, I'll give you addition too. Paul Steinhardt at Princeton talks about big bounds. He talks about of the universe.
Yes, of course, there are scientists who present different models. That's consistent with what I've said. I would also say that I feel like you're presenting or accepting different standards here, because when I appeal to a scientific result, you refer to different models and theories, which of course they do exist, as I've acknowledged. But when I challenge you on some of the translations and understandings of various Puranic texts, you sort of downplay these and try to say that the differences don't matter, or it's because the scholars haven't been exposed to the knowledge, or that they just didn't translate it correctly, which I feel like is rather an inconsistent approach towards scholarly difference.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that I would not take if there is a different opinion on that subject matter. I'm open to that. But what you're offering is that you are rejecting my interpretation of the text, which is what I'm objecting to. Like when there are two different opinions on a scientific matter, like suppose there's Big Bang or Big Bounce, I would not say, hey, I'm just going to go with one because that's what I like. That fits with my mental model. I'm saying there are two models. Let's see both of them who wins in the future. I'm proposing an interpretation of the Puranas, and I published a paper, and I'm trying to create an opinion of the scientists, of the scholars in this field, that this is the right model to go forward with. And it's a slow process. Science takes time. Like, be it any scientific discovery, it takes time for it to percolate.
And frozen. We've looped right around to the beginning of your presentation, or your line of questioning, James, where you said, would you say that this argument or presentation that you've given should convince me? Like, is that the intention of it? And then effectively what you're saying here is that it kind of looks like, okay, you found some kind of correspondence with some part of it, with some type of interpretation, and now you're going to run with that. But what about these parts of it that don't correspond? How are you going to deal with that? And what about interpretations from within your own tradition that don't correspond? It kind of looks like cherry picking.
Right. Well, so obviously, that's what I'm attempting to build through these questions. I have a couple more questions that I did want to ask, but that was basically where I'm trying to articulate this through asking a series of questions as to how can we address these concerns that I have looking at this, where it seems to me that the sort of cherry picking and fudging comes out. And we've looked at a few of those so far. There's a couple more that I did want to ask about.
I can go with those, but I'd take a stronger position than he just took, right? Like this big bounce, big crunch thing, I'm here to tell you that it's going to be a big collapse, because the Puranas say that the thing is cyclic and that it like gets created and destroyed cyclically. And history will be my judge, just as it has been with this, that one day scientists will come to the accurate understanding that is presented in the Puranas.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I expected that's what Sidharth would say as well, to be honest. But that's why I wanted to ask.
Yeah, I'm going to double down on that. Let's take the next question. What do you got?
That's fine. Okay, so one of my questions was about what happens between Manvantaras, roughly 300-ish million year periods. Well, I think that he would times that by 2, but anyway, because I'll just ask that. What happens between those periods of time?
What happens between the Manvantaras?
To Earth, particularly.
Okay, that's a great question. I don't know.
Well, so the reason I asked this is because according to what I read, this is supposed to be a time when the earthly realm is a deluge, submerged underwater, and it's a period of sort of partial but not complete destruction.
It's an extinction. It's an extinction event.
Well, so one question I had was, although there have obviously been extinction events in Earth's history, there haven't been a time when the Earth's been submerged completely, nor when life has become completely extinct.
Well, there is, for sure. Yeah, 100%.
Sorry, there is what?
Yeah, there's times where life gets, where the Earth
completely
gets submerged.
Extinct.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, when the Earth becomes submerged.
Yeah, you haven't seen those electric universe things? They reckon Velikovsky, worlds in collision, that whole thing.
I don't know what you're talking about at this point.
So Velikovsky was this guy, who came up with this hypothesis that the Earth is periodically destroyed by like it's Nibiru or something like that. It's one of two things that they hypothesize. It's an extrasolar body that has a long orbital period, and it keeps coming back and passing in through the solar system and destroying the Earth. The other one is that the sun undergoes like a micronova event. I mean, some people, tinfoil hats on, guys, are saying that, you know, the whole NASA space program was for them to go out and collect evidence from other planets and from the moon to see if they could see what the periodization of it was. And that seed vault that they did in Norway, and even the GitHub Arctic code vault, where they put all that code into a hard drive and stuck it under the Arctic, and all those deep underground military bases that they've been building with that black budget, as well as the ones that we know about, is all because the elites know that one of those events is coming soon and they're preparing for it. And there's like lots of kind of geological evidence that, if you look into that more, people point to as like evidence of these kind of events happening.
Would you describe that as a mainstream scientific position?
Well, if you have a look at something like the KT boundary, you know, where they found that impact dust, you know, spread around the Earth from a meteorite, and then that crater down in the Gulf of Mexico, and then they hypothesized that 65 million years ago, some asteroid hit the Earth and extincted the dinosaurs, and there was like a nuclear winter kind of effect, and only the small mammals survived. Yeah. That's the kind of thing that happens between the Manvantaras.
So it's not complete extinction or submergence of the Earth, because neither of those things happened at the KT boundary.
Complete extinction. Well, yes. Again, the Puranas are written from the perspective of human beings. So from the perspective of like any humans around at the time, that's pretty much a complete extinction.
Okay, well, that was another thing that I was going to ask. According to Hindu cosmology, how long have humans been on the Earth?
Millions of years.
How many millions?
Lots of them. All of them.
Tens of millions, hundreds of millions?
Yes, both.
Okay, well, that presents another problem, because that's not consistent with scientific evidence, obviously, according to which modern humans have only existed for maybe 100,000 or 200,000 years, and then there are predecessors to that, maybe a few million years, depends exactly how you define it, but certainly not hundreds of millions of years.
You obviously haven't watched Ancient Artifacts on Amazon Prime, where they find like that bell inside a lump of coal. Yeah, so that's all the anomalous evidence, right? Like bells that they find inside lumps of coal.
Right, yeah, I have heard claims of that
How'd this get in here? Now, the thing about that is that kind of evidence gets like shuffled out of the narrative, because that couldn't be right. And there's like a knowledge filter that stops that from going into this mainstream accepted narrative. You know, it's kind of heretical science.
Okay. I'm not sure if Sidharth would exactly defend that view, or some of the views you've been espousing here, because I want to make sure that I'm not strawmanning any of his positions.
I know that he definitely would not go with that one, because I said that to him last time. I said, dude, you should go with the Ancient Artifacts. I was watching it on Amazon Prime, bro. There's heaps of them.
Right. Okay. So, but according to what you've said, at least, it'd be interesting if Sidharth can get back and clarify. So
it looks like he's trying to, but he keeps bouncing in and out. Hopefully he'll get back, and I'll fill him in.
Yeah, well, so putting the artifacts aside for the moment, but at least that humans have lived on Earth for, say, tens to hundreds of millions of years.
Yeah.
And that there have been periods of, well, at least complete extinction of humans, and I wasn't sure on the submergence point. But another concern I have is that the times we have, so this is a question that I want to ask Sidharth, that he lined up the Permian mass extinction with the, I think, the start of the last or the end of the previous Manvantara, I believe.
Yes.
I think that was the line that he had. But the question is how to understand the other mass extinction events. So the KT is another one. There have been, I think, 5 mass extinctions in the history of Earth that we know about, where large percentages of all life, but not all life, went extinct. And those don't seem to fit into the Hindu cosmology. It only appears to be that particular one, which was different only by degree. Sure, it was the largest, but it's not like that there weren't others as well. So I wanted to ask about how to understand these other mass extinctions.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, that Permian extinction, last time I read the Wikipedia article was a long time ago, but it was like 97% of all fossilized life in the sea seems to have disappeared. And then it was hypothesized that it was caused by the Russian steppes becoming volcanic and putting gases into the air. I mean, one way to explain it could be that one is extinction of human beings. The other one's the humans don't go extinct. I think we got Sidharth back.
Oh,
okay,
welcome back.
Sidharth. Ancient artifacts, bells
Sorry.
inside coal, and humans being around for hundreds of millions of years. You got to defend that now because I brought it up.
Okay, we'll do all those. But
Sorry,
first, I have a question for.
Sidharth, did you hear what I was saying while you were?
No, yeah, I lost
okay.
you were something.
No, that's fine. I can repeat something. That's fine.
Yeah, break out a roll of tinfoil and James will fill you in.
Sorry, go ahead, James. Yeah. Then I have a question for you also. Whenever you like, you can finish your point first because you were speaking.
Yeah. Okay. So I just had a couple of questions about some of the aspects of the timeline. So just so it's not too repetitious, I'll just try to be fairly quick. So one is what happens at the end of a month or between or at the end of a manvantara to what happens to Earth. So I was discussing the view that what I'd heard was that the Earth was submerged.
No. The Bhumandala is submerged in water, and on Bhumandala,
which is what?
Which
sorry,
is
I'm not familiar with that term.
Okay, so Bhumandala is a higher dimensional world which surrounds our Earth, and it has some kind of a strange connection with our Earth, which I don't understand how does it work, because it's a higher dimensional feature which I have no understanding. It's a subtle world of which Earth is a part of it. So according to the Puranas, we are on a Jambu Dvipa, which is a part of the Bhumandala, and Bhumandala is a subtle. It's a location which can be accessed by somebody who follows the Puranic process. So if you were to follow the Puranic austerities and penance, one can access Bhumandala, and it has many other features which can't be accessed unless one is, elevated in one's consciousness. So Earth is a part of it, and according to the Puranas, on Bhumandala there is a mass devastation. Like many living entities die. There is a big flood. Many kingdoms are destroyed, and only few of the people, very few of the kings and personalities they survive to go forward. And it also discusses different events and phenomena like sun, sun killing minute living entities. I mean, there is much more detail to it. The point being, at the end of every manvantara, there is supposed to be a mass devastation, a mass extinction, according to the Puranas. So that's what I correlate with the Earth's greatest mass extinction. In fact, according to the Puranas, at the end of last manvantara was the biggest manvantara pralaya up till now.
Okay, so you don't accept that the Earth, this Earth, the earthly realm, was flooded or deluged at the end of each.
Yeah, that's not the Puranas. The Puranas saying is the Bhumandala which is deluged, not the Earth.
But Earth is a part of that, you said.
Earth is a part of it. Like if you have suppose you have a sphere and you cut a plane out of it, a two-dimensional plane is a part of it, which means that its periphery will meet the points on the sphere, but not necessarily the same. So part has many different ways of explaining. We're talking about higher dimensional and lower dimensional objects. A lower dimensional object is a part of it, but not necessarily the same thing.
Okay, right. So none of that's detectable because we don't have access to those realms.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the Puranas say that one can follow the process by which one can access those worlds also. They're giving a process to access the world.
Right. Okay. So,
but you have asked a question. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Or you have a follow-up?
Well, if we could just finish the point about the manvantaras, because I did have one follow, and then you can ask that question. But this relates directly to what I was asking. Because the other point is, apart from the deluge question, you said that there's an extinction event between manvantaras, and that does correlate to or correspond to the time of the Permian mass extinction. But what I was just asking about previously, where you're offline, is that there have been, I think, 5 mass extinctions in the history of Earth, and only one of them corresponds to the time between manvantaras, of which there have presumably been quite a number of them. So why does only one of them correspond to the boundary of manvantaras?
Well, as I said earlier, that the Puranas are not giving extensive list of all the events which have happened on Earth or the Bhumandala. They're giving only the ones from which we can learn lessons. 2, according to the Puranas, because there are 2 ways you can ask the question. One way would be that what about the previous manvantara pralayas? Why don't they correspond to mass extinctions? Or the other way you can ask is that why don't other mass extinctions which happen on Earth show up in the Puranas? There are 2 ways you can say.
Yes.
So to answer the second way, the Puranas, as I said, are not extensive books of paleontology or evolutionary knowledge. So they don't have all the events which are significant on Earth. They only have events which have lessons to be learned for the purpose of purification. Going to answering the first point, why doesn't all the mantra transitions in the previous one, why don't they correspond to a mass extinction? The answer to that is given, and I discuss this in my book, not in the paper, because paper is limited in terms of what you can put. The book is what's happening. I keep losing you. Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Are you there? Okay. So yeah. So according to the Puranas, Daksha, he is the person in charge of different living entities or creating progeny on Bhumandala. He is not able to perform his duties because of a Puranic phenomena. He gets cursed right in the beginning of the day of Brahma, and he doesn't come back until 800 million years ago from his curse. So there were no living beings to have experienced those pralayas to be able to record. We could record them and have a data for them. So because of a Puranic phenomena, we don't have a data for.
I heard what you said, but I think you're back. You're just breaking up again a little bit. Okay, so
yeah.
So you had a question for me.
Yeah. So my question was this. Also, my internet is breaking. So I want to ask the question before I go off for another.
Yeah, fair enough.
Few minutes because I'm traveling. There's bad internet. I'm sorry. And I know you have a lot of patience. You can probably go for 7 hours straight. But not all of us are have the internet capacity and the technology right now to do that.
Fair enough.
Okay. Okay. So my question was this.
I can hear you. So just you cut. Your
what
English
is that?
Cuts out a little bit, but I can hear you.
Sounds like you got someone in the background.
Okay.
Singing.
Oh, I do. I can mute my microphone.
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay, so, yeah, that's good. Yeah, so what I was saying was that my question was this: that, I discussed these 3 data points in my presentation right in the beginning. That these 3 are extraordinary data points, and I'm making an extraordinary claim that the Puranas are genuine source of knowledge. And you are raising some doubts. You're saying there's some other scholars who have a different opinion on this subject matter, and they don't hold the same interpretation like me on this subject matter. So my question is this: if I were to say in future, any theory is as good as if it can make good predictions. So I'm making a claim that the Puranas are a good source of genuine knowledge, and we have shown these 3 data points in which Puranas have stand themselves, vindicated by modern science. So I have 2 questions in it. One, more scholars take up would that make you convinced enough to try the Puranic method for experiencing Krishna or finding more about God? And 2, if more predictions come out to be true based on my model, would that convince you again in future? Because I already have like a dozen predictions, more data points in my book, not just from the field of data, from the dates, but also knowledge from embryology, from distances, and other kinds of data points there too. So would seeing such more data points, would that convince you to take the Puranic method or the Puranas in such a manner that you will try the Puranic method for experiencing a relationship with God?
Right. So the first question was that if other scholars came to accept your interpretations, would that cause me to what was the consequence of that? Accept the Puranic method? Is that what you phrased?
To try the Puranic method and try to reestablish or experience for yourself, because if more scholars accept it, then I stand vindicated in my claim, and I stand strong that yes, the Puranas are genuine source of knowledge. So if anybody is saying that there is no God, then they'll have to try the method themselves. Because suppose there's this new scientific discovery, and suppose somebody says, I have found this virus which causes the COVID virus, and he writes a paper about it. Now, it will take some time before all these scholars, all these scientists in the field accept it. But if you are doubting it, the only way you can check it is you can go take it to your own lab and follow the same process and see if that virus exists. So if you are saying, hey, you're supposedly an atheist and you're saying God doesn't exist, and I have presented you some evidence, Now the next step would be, like, hey, if you still doubt me after seeing this evidence that God doesn't exist, then I'm assuming that your next step would be that you will try the Puranic process for experiencing your relationship with God or Krishna. Is that correct?
Well, I still haven't answered the first question yet. So the first question is, if more scholars came to accept the interpretation, then sort of would I change my view, I guess is a short way to say that. I would say that would, well, depending on some details, but just basically that would mitigate some of my concerns about particularly the two new postulates that you make about the Pratisandhi and the factor of 2. So those particular concerns would be mitigated to the extent that more scholars who understand the text came to adopt those views. Now, there are other objections or concerns that I've raised, and a couple that I haven't yet, that wouldn't necessarily be mitigated by that, because they're not just interpretive questions with respect to Puranas. They're also about evaluating what they're saying sort of scientifically. But I would say that, yeah, to the extent that some of my objections were related to disputes about the interpretation of the text, to the extent that those are mollified by your interpretation becoming accepted, then those would be removed. So that's fair. I agree with that.
Okay. So then, what are those objections? Let's go to those objections which you can't be convinced of, even though other scholars may accept my interpretation. What are those objections which will help, in making my case stronger? What are those objections?
Right. Well, we've already discussed some of the issues. One is the relationship between the creation of the solar system and the creation of the universe. I guess partly that's an interpretive issue as well. But there's also the factor of the issue about what's happening during Brahma's night, which I think there's a potential concern with. I don't want to rehash that. I'm just summarizing it. Then there was the issue about the time between the Manvantaras and whether those line up with the mass extinctions. Again, I don't want to go over that again because we just discussed it, but I'm just summarizing it. But I did want to ask another question about an issue.
Wait.
Sorry.
Just wait. But those issues are not the issues with the data points I discussed, because even if you have those concerns, that still doesn't provide an explanation for the data points. What I'm saying is that if scholars come to accept my interpretation for Pratisandhi and factor of 2, and they come to accept the interpretation which I've given in the paper, then you still have these data points for which you have no way to account for them. How do you account for them?
Well, take the example of the Manvantaras, right? So if it seems to me that your claim would to predict that mass extinctions in the history of Earth would line up with the boundaries between Manvantaras, and that's not true except for one. Now, that appears to me to be a classic case of cherry picking or fudging the numbers, because what you say is that the one where it lines up is important and relevant, and the other ones, well, you say that they're not necessarily making claims about it, or they're only claiming about things that are important, or they don't like to talk about everything. You just basically wave it away as it's not important. That is not very persuasive to me. If there was a lineup between all 5 mass extinctions and 5 boundaries, that would be much more persuasive for me, as an example.
Okay. Now, to that point, I would like to go over a small basic concept in probability. In probability, if a probability of an event is 10 raised to the power, say, minus 186, or 10 raised to the power 62, 186 for these 3 data points, and if you're saying that I'm cherry picking, I'm saying I'm not cherry picking, but if you're saying that I'm cherry picking and there are 5 other data points which I'm ignoring, or suppose there are 100 other data points which I'm ignoring, that reduces the probability to 10 raised to the power minus 180. So that doesn't change still my argument. So I'm not really sure that even if you accuse me that I'm cherry picking, how does my claim become weaker? If the probability is still very low for somebody to get those dates right, even if they had 5 chances to get those dates, if the one of the date which they got is so precise that the probability of getting it right is 10 raised to the power minus 180, then I still think I have a very strong case in terms of probability there. I'm not sure how you explain yourself there.
I think this is what we discussed when you weren't on, Sidharth. And if I got it right, James, your point was that that data set is incomplete because there are other extinction events other than the Permian one, and the Puranic data set doesn't have those dates in it. So it only has the Permian one. And it's kind of like they threw out one number and there's multiple extinction events in the history of the Earth, and this one just happened to fall on one. So you got lucky. If they had predicted all 5 of them and got them right.
No, but what's the probability of getting that lucky? What's the probability of that, Josh? Suppose I were to come to your home and I'm able to guess credit card numbers of 11 family members of yours right at the first go. And suppose I were to wrongly or not talk about your your food which you ate yesterday, that still is a very big, proposition I'm making. The probability of guessing those 3 dates right is equal to me guessing 11 credit card numbers right at the first go. Even if I suppose don't talk about what you ate yesterday or what color of shorts you're wearing or what color of pants you wore yesterday, that does not defeat my claim. You have to understand this is probability. In probability, you have to see there's a thing on the top and thing on the bottom. The top is the cases in which you tried, and the bottom is total number of cases. The total number of cases is 10 raised to the power minus 10 raised to the power 180. This is basics of probability.
Okay, so what you're saying then is that the Permian extinction event is in some sense distinct from the other extinction events like the KT boundary, that kind of stuff. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that. No, I'm saying the probability of somebody guessing an exact date for Permian mass extinction,
sure, yeah,
age of the universe and age of the Earth is so low that even if they don't talk about other data points, or if they talk about them wrongly, which I don't think so, is the probability is so low that you can't bring out the explanation as lucky guessing.
How come the Permian? Okay, but how come the Permian? How come the Permian? I got your point there, that they nailed that one, and that's very, it's on the number, right? And it's highly improbable to guess it. But
yes,
you're saying that the Manvantara, the end of the Manvantara, there's an extinction event, and there's this Permian extinction event that happens at the same time the Puranas say that the Manvantara ended. But what about the other extinction events that we see in the geological record?
Again, we can talk about those things, but I'm going to repeat my point one more time, that whether they discussed that data point or not, that they were correct or not, just the case that they were able to guess one data point correctly, for which, or the 3 data points correctly, for which the probability is 10 to the power minus 180, you can bring 1,000 more data points, whether they're correct or not. You put 1,000 on the top and you put 10 raised to the power 180 at the bottom. The probability of the whole system is 10 raised to the power minus 177.
Yeah, it's very 2019 science, though. I mean, in 2020, the heuristic. Yeah, I mean, but it's very 2019, right, with numbers and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the heuristic in 2021 is did your research get banned, and did Jack Dorsey kick you off Twitter? That's when I would start to believe it. I'm joking, but I get the Permian. I would actually take it really seriously if you did get banned for it. I'd be like, this is definitely true. You mentioned before about if someone said they had a cure for COVID, I was like, if they banned it, then I would probably think there was something to it.
Yeah.
But this point that James brought up earlier about the other extinction events, like the Manvantara, the end of the Manvantara is an extinction event on the Earth, right? And there are other extinction events. So where do they fit into this overall picture? Because otherwise, it's very unlikely. But if you had multiple extinction events that you could land it on, and it happened to land on one, see, it isn't simply 1 over 10 to 62, because it could have landed on one of the other ones, right? So you had multiple targets to correlate with.
Yeah, that's right. Suppose there are 10 multiple targets. You put 10 targets on the top of the equation. So you have 10, 62 at the bottom, and 10 on the top. What is the probability of the whole system? 10 minus 61. Doesn't make the probability much higher. This is simple basics of probability.
So Sidharth, it's probably not going to surprise you that I don't accept your probability calculations for the probability of getting this by chance. When you factor in the degrees of freedom that you had, which as a data scientist, I'm sure you're aware, you have to consider researcher degrees of freedom when assessing p-values or any significance figures. And the issue I have is that it's not clear to me that so like before you did this research, you said you looked at these texts and you found this. Before you did that, I don't think that you would have predicted specifically that the cosmology would predict this one mass extinction, but not any of the others, and it would predict the age of the solar system, but like not other dates we have from cosmology, and so forth. So it seems to me that there are many degrees of freedom that you could have correlated. I don't even know how many, a huge number of different possible dates or numbers from, or really not just dates, but other observations from cosmology. And you were looking for any such things. And this has been done, I'm not making this up about you specifically, because I know this has been done with respect to the Bible. People go through the Bible and they add up the numbers of letters and verses and other things, and they find these correlations. And the problem with them is that they don't have any constraints on what they're looking for. They're just looking for anything. So the number of degrees of freedom is so enormous, it's impossible to calculate these probabilities accurately as to the chance of getting them by chance, because there's no constraint on what it is exactly that you're looking for. It's just anything that seems to support the existing view, it seems to me.
I think you're missing up two things there. First of all, degrees of freedom will come when the first thing, if you were to assume that other scholars were to accept my translation and interpretations, then there's no case for degrees of freedom. Degrees of freedom come into place when you're saying there's opportunities for various interpretations. I'm saying, let us for now assume that other scholars in future come to accept. Even now, already it's peer reviewed, and some scholars have already accepted it. But in future, more scholars come to accept my perspective or interpretation on these texts. There's no case anymore for degrees of freedom anymore. Degrees of freedom would come into place when there were a million more ways of interpreting the same text, and there was no scholars who would not accept my proposition. But I'm saying for now, assume it that currently about 10 scholars accept my proposition. In future, say 100 scholars accept my proposition. In such a case, how would you explain these 3 data points and other data points in my book?
Well, I've already mentioned a couple of points, and I can't comment on anything that I haven't read, so I'll just talk about these 3. But with respect to the idea of degrees of freedom, I don't agree that degrees of freedom come only from interpreting the text, although that's one aspect of it. But they come from any correlation or anything that can be tested. So I would ask you, why is it that you tested these specific claims and not any other claim that modern science makes? Now, you do say that you looked at some other things in your book, so I guess it's not just these 3. But the point is that it seems to me that any congruence that you found that could be interpreted in a way that it provides a congruence with modern science, you would have presented, and none of those were predicted beforehand. So that's why it's not just interpreting the text. It's any fact that modern science has apparently discovered that appeared to correlate with things that you found in the Puranas. And so, how many facts has modern science uncovered? Well, I don't know what the number is, but it's extraordinarily large. It seems that any of these that you found would have fit the bill, and that there's not a clear prediction that you would find these particular ones.
Not really, because when the Puranas say Brahma created the sun at the end of his night, I don't have many ways to interpret it. There's not much degrees of freedom I have. I can't say he created Jupiter or he created some other phenomena. It is quite clear there in the text that they're saying this. Moreover, I went for all the dates which are possibly given in the Puranas. That's why I said there are about a dozen dates there, and I cover all of them in my book. I don't leave any single one of them out of my book. And in fact, all of them have correspond to significant events. But of all those events, the 3 events are very significant for our knowledge, which is age of the sun, age of the universe, and the greatest mass extinction. And it just happens so that these 3 dates are among the dozen dates which were discussed in the Puranas, for which the dates are available. And these are quite unambiguous presentations in the Puranas. You can't really interpret age of the sun or creation of the sun in some other way. Like sun is translated as Surya in Sanskrit. There's no other way you can translate Surya into something else. You can ask Josh, he's my fellow Puranic scholar here. He has read Puranas for some time. How many ways can you translate Surya into, or creation of Surya by Brahma? There's not many degrees of freedom there, is it?
Into English, into French, into Spanish, into Mandarin Chinese. Yeah. Hey, we got 10 minutes to the top of the hour. And there are some questions in the chat. And I did hear you mention, James, that you had some further questions as well.
I have one more question I'd like to ask, which I already asked you, but I didn't get to ask Sidharth. The question is, how long have humans been on the Earth according to his chronology?
Let's see if I got it right.
On the Earth?
On your view.
Don't discuss how long the humans have been. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, according to the Puranas, there have been humans on Bhumandala for all this time. The Puranas don't discuss Earth specifically. They discuss Bhumandala. They don't discuss Earth.
So how long has Earth existed?
Earth has existed as long as Bhumandala. Earth is part of the Bhumandala.
So there have been humans around, but not necessarily on Earth.
Yeah.
Extraterrestrials,
My understanding was that there is a view in Hindu cosmology about a yuga cycle.
Yep.
According to which humans live for progressively shorter periods of time and are progressively shorter in stature.
Damn, this guy's done his homework.
That's all on Bhumandala. As I said earlier.
So that's not on Earth.
Bhumandala, yes.
So, but that's not on the physical Earth. Like
yeah,
not
the three-dimensional Earth which we are inhabiting. That's Jambu Dvipa inside Bharatvarsha is not necessarily discussed. As I said earlier, the Puranas are describing events happening on Bhumandala, the subtle world, and that's something they posit right in the beginning, and a number of times in the Puranas, that they're describing the world which is subtle.
Okay, so that concludes the questions that I had, and I feel like that I'll just briefly summarize what I want to say and then take questions whenever time we have left. But what it appears to me is that when there's an apparent congruence, you want to interpret these Puranic texts so that they describe the physical universe. And when there appears to be a discongruence, like the examples that I gave about the apparent quiescence of the early universe according to the Puranic text, or the lifespan of the different humans, or the deluge between the Manvantaras, you in every case just say that it's not to interpret literally, it's a different realm, it's not talking about that. And this is what I mean by degrees of freedom. Whenever you want to appeal to something as relating to science, you can say that it describes the physical universe literally. But when you don't, you just interpret it a different way. And that's precisely what I mean by degrees of freedom, and why I think that this is all concocted as a way to try to validate something that you already believed through fudging and interpretation. That's the view that I hold about how to explain these congruences. And I haven't seen anything today that's changed my mind, which is why I asked that question at the outset, should this change my mind? I haven't found that. I'm open to seeing that, but I feel like the answers you've given me just are consistent with what I thought at the beginning. So that's really all I had to say.
Confirmation bias. Joking. 150 days to UFO disclosure. Just before you respond to that, 150 days to the UFO disclosure, right? That's when we find out about the interdimensional aliens, and then James will be like, "I was talking to this guy," and then you get banned from Twitter.
Looking forward to it.
Confirmed.
Well, I wanted to also add something there, that if whenever I bring in the point about these data points in the Puranas, whenever I ask you to provide an explanation, you try to deviate from the topic and go to other topics, other descriptions in the Puranas, and how they don't match up with the science. But the fact of the matter is that you haven't provided me a single explanation. How would you account for those? If other scholars, already some scholars have accepted it, if how other scholars, like when they also accept it, how would you account for it? And you seem to have no way to account for it. You just seem to say that no matter how many people accept it, because you have made an opinion on this subject, and you have a perspective or a worldview, you're not ready to come out of worldview. And that was my point right in the beginning, that you can wake up somebody who is sleeping, but you can't wake up somebody who's acting that they're sleeping.
Did you want me to respond? I mean, I'm happy to leave where I did, but if you want me to add anything.
Yeah, let's go to questions. Yeah, we got questions in chat. Okay, so let's have a look. Okay, so Arpit Sarkar, top fan, he wants to know, what's your Puranic source for the mass extinction claim?
Matsya Purana, Bhagavad Purana. Those are the two prominent ones, and there are many more. I give references in the paper and the book.
Okay, so that's a plug for your book on Amazon.com. Heretical Science. Okay, now Cody is wondering when the end of the world is coming. According to the Puranas, is a mass extinction coming up? And if so, when exactly? Here's your chance to make a testable prediction. According to the Puranas,
we are in many more thousands of years here in this Kali Yuga, and in this Kali Yuga, after hundreds of thousands of years, the planet will be kind of like uninhabitable because of our lifestyles we are living right now of non-stop sense enjoyment, and that would cause people to start living in the under the earth. There won't be any vegetables left. People will be much more shorter in height. That's the description of mostly the Bhumandala, not necessarily everything is given in regards to the earth. So one thing is for sure, in about 800,000 of years, we will make a shift to an era where people will be living much more a goodness lifestyle.
800,000 or 1,600,000?
800,000.
Okay, that's with the factor of 2 in there?
Yeah.
Okay, I was just checking. Okay, so there's a testable prediction there. The only thing about that one is you would have to first test the prediction about reincarnation to get there.
I had a question about. Go ahead.
There's actually another testable prediction about which is much more easy to test, which is, according to the Puranas, our sun would break into a red giant and then a planetary nebula in 5.3 billion years. And currently, the scientists don't have an exact opinion on this topic because they don't yet know exact metallicity of the sun. There is a difference of opinions on that subject matter. So scientists, astrophysicists are working on that. There is different schools. Some schools say as early as 4.5, and some schools say as late as 7 billion years. There's a range of opinions because of the lack of consensus on the metallicity of the sun. So that's one testable prediction which will come out in the future, whether, what is the lifetime left for the sun, because that is something outside of our, Bhumandala, our Earth, which is, a feature which you can really test.
So can I just ask about the thing you just said previously about the 800,000 years? In which there'll be change that. Sorry, you said people will start living more virtuous and longer. Is that right?
Did we sorry say again?
People will become more virtuous and start living longer. Is that what you said?
Something like that will happen on Mandala.
Yeah, but not necessarily on Earth.
Not necessarily on Earth. So okay. I'm guessing that there's a correlation there, but because there's been correlation before.
Well, there hasn't been, if we're to interpret the Yuga cycle literally, because it doesn't fit with what we know scientifically. People didn't used to live to be 100, or maybe it'd be 200,000 years old by because of the factor of 2. And be 10 meters tall, or is it 20 meters tall? If the factor of 2 applies there, I'm not sure.
Well, we don't know that they didn't. I mean,
well, we do know. We have fossil evidence, and there'd be other factors about gravity wouldn't work with a mammal that big, and
okay, well that's
with
based
the same
on
proportions.
That's based on 2 things. That's based on an assumption of the completeness of the fossil record. That's the first one, and then the other thing it's based on is the universality of like current physical conditions of the universe across time.
Well, if we reject those, then we can't really accept the current cosmological ages for the age of the sun or the universe, because those are contingent on those assumptions as well.
Yeah, so basically we got no idea. Ultimately, I mean, epistemologically, right? I'm pretty sure I'm here having a conversation with you guys, but I could be in a tank, with plugs sticking in me. I got no idea, ultimately. But solipsist. Okay, look, here we're at the top of the hour, guys. Great conversation. Here's the question from Cody. He wants to know, what's the book's title? He doesn't specify which one.
So previously I released a book, it's like a pre-book, and it was titled The Heretic Science. I recently had a big launch with another big company practically around the world, and we're going to do also an India launch, and the book is called The Big Bang and the Sages. So that is the latest title, and which is currently on Amazon.com.uk.in and also on Kindle. The Big Bang and the Sages.
Awesome. The Big Bang and the Sages. And James, do you have a book? You do. Do you want to show your book again?
Yeah, I'll plug that again. My book's called Unreasonable Faith, How William Lane Craig Overstates the Case for Christianity. You can pick this up on Amazon. So I'm discussing somewhat analogous arguments, but I guess more from a Christian point of view, or Protestant Christian perspective, and providing my sort of skeptical, naturalistic take on those. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check that out.
Epic. And is it available on Kindle? Because that's how I read it.
Yeah, it's also on Kindle.
Okay, great. Coming to a Kindle store near you. Epic. Yeah, well, thank you both for being here, present in this conversation. Sidharth, I acknowledge you for the deep scholarship that you've done, and for being courageous in presenting such a controversial opinion and being willing to defend it in the public square. And James, I acknowledge you for bringing full-throated skepticism and rigorously, challenging Siddhartha right down to the bottom there with, a very well-structured and reasoned argument to give him the opportunity to examine and to defend his thesis. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to spend these last 2 hours with you both. Thank you. And I'm wishing you both all the best for the rest of 2021, the dyslexic Mayan apocalypse. Yo, here for it.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a pleasure, and I wanted to thank Sidharth as well for his comments and robust responses.
Well, I would like to thank Josh first, for tolerating
Wearing a red shirt.
Tolerating the torture of so many questions and so many details, could be really tough. While you're not participating, you have to actively listen. Then thank you for jumping in all the, whenever there were tense moments, you came and lightened up the movement. And I'm thankful to James for bringing in really good questions. I'm happy to always meet people who are bringing in rational questions and, good points to, so it helped me make my case stronger. So I really appreciate those questions.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And thank you to all of our viewers today for your questions. Cody, Arpit, Josh Evans, great name, Tiny Temple. Thanks for tuning in to all those millions of viewers on the internet in the future. Some of them not even born yet, because this live stream is but a moment, but the internet is forever, or at least until the zombie apocalypse comes and we lose the power, or the video gets banned because it's too close to the truth. This is Theology Unleashed. I've been your host, Josh Wolf, today with our guests, James Fodor, and the godless theist, and Sidharth, the heretical scientist. Thank you, and good night, good day.